If you do not consent to being recorded, please disconnect from this webcast. If you do disconnect, please contact your grant manager to let them know so that we can make sure you have all the information you need. Otherwise, by staying on this webcast, you are consenting to being recorded and having the recording made available to the public. We will be sending a link to the recording. We will be sending a link of the recording and copies of today's slides out to everyone who's registered. Please make sure you are muted so as to minimize any background noises and distractions. Please feel free to send us your questions through the chat, and we will answer them at the end of the presentation. We will now begin the recording. Please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat with your name, organization, and location. To start things off, I want to congratulate everyone on being selected for an acquisition award, and thank you for partnering with the state of California to protect these lands. Today, our team is going to walk you through the department's acquisition process and discuss any updates over previous rounds. This workshop is intended to clarify the grant agreement and easement or fee acquisition requirements and will help you move your project through the process as efficiently as possible. And now for a quick overview of this year's grant cycle. We had a great pool of SALC applicants with 42 acquisition grant applications, of which 37 were awarded, for a total of over $108 million, protecting over 50,000 acres across 22 counties. For more details about the projects that were awarded, please visit the SALC webpage. Next slide. Today's presentation is made up of 4 main sections. We'll cover how to enter into the grant agreement, completing your transaction, and post-closing tasks. After the presentation, there will be time to ask any questions you might have. You can find many of the documents we are referencing today on our Managing Your Grant webpage. Okay, now we'll talk about entering into a grant agreement. This flowchart shows the major steps in the process of executing the grant agreement. Our goal is to get these executed no later than March 15th. Once the grant has been reviewed and approved, once the grantee has reviewed and approved the grant agreement, the grant manager will send it for additional DOC review. Once approved internally, the grant agreement will be sent to the grantee by the grant manager for signature via DocuSign. The grantee will then sign electronically and return the signed grant agreement back to the grant manager by February 23rd. The grant manager will then initiate the second internal and final routing. The Department of Conservation Director will then sign. Lastly, DOC will email you with a digital copy of the fully executed grant agreement. We will aim to have grant agreements executed by March 15th, 2024. Any work that you wish to bill to the program should begin on or after that or the final execution date, whichever is later. Next slide, please. The budget worksheet allows space to differentiate funding for multiple easements. And if your project includes more than one easement, you can fill out both easement A and easement B lines in the budget worksheet. If your project only includes one easement, please delete the line for easement B. The grant agreement states that the maximum amount of associated costs available to the grantee. Generally, that's $60,000 for associated costs, plus $10,000 for a carbon farm plan or management plan, although those amounts may be more or less depending on what you included in the grant application and what was approved in your award letter. You may allocate your associated cost award between any approved line items. The template budget worksheet lists the most common line items for which funding is requested. If you wish to allocate funding to an associated cost that is on the approved list in the program guidelines, but is not reflected in the budget worksheet, you may add a line item for that, though grant manager approval may be required in some cases. We recommend leaving all existing associated cost line items in the budget in case you need to make a budget modification later. Removal of any line item may require an amendment to add that line item back in after the grant is executed. If you wish to request reimbursement for staff hours, please use the staff member's title rather than name, and include the fully burdened rate at which that position will be billed. Keep in mind that your staff rates may increase over time. However, the rates included in the budget cannot be increased, so take that into consideration when incorporating a staff rate. Your current fully burdened staff rate may be less than the maximum rate incorporated into the grant agreement, but you cannot bill at a future rate higher than what is in the grant agreement. Before submitting the budget for inclusion in the grant agreement, confirm that the worksheet reflects the total amount approved in your award letter, including any funding requested for the development of a management plan or carbon farm plan. Again, unless previously approved by the Strategic Growth Council, the subtotal of associated costs in the inclusion of a management or carbon farm plan may not exceed $70,000. Next slide, please. While we're aiming to have all grant agreements finalized by March 15th, you must submit all supporting materials and have a signed agreement within 6 months of the Strategic Growth Council award or risk forfeiting the grant award. 6 months from December 14th, 2023, which was the date of the SGC meeting, takes us into June 2024. SALC grant managers will work closely with you to meet this time frame. The grant term will typically be 2 years. If you intend to utilize NRCS as a match funder for your project, please reach out to the grant manager within the next week to let them know, as this may impact your grant term. The terms and conditions of the grant agreement are considered non-negotiable. However, certain attachments will be customized for each project. As a reminder, grantees are eligible to invoice for associated costs on a monthly basis. However, you may not submit any invoices until 60 days after the grant agreement has been executed. Proof of insurance documentation, which would be a certificate of insurance noting DOC as additionally insured, must be submitted to the grant manager within 30 days of the grant agreement execution date and yearly, or as they are reissued thereafter. Grantees may submit one insurance certificate to cover all of their grants each year. For all invoices, please submit an unsigned draft of the invoice to the grant manager for review before submitting a signed invoice to allow for any necessary edits or corrections. Unless it is already on file, each grantee will also need to provide an updated payee data record form, which ensures that your organization is in our state system. If this is applicable to you, your grant manager will provide this form to you in the near future. Finally, an implementation schedule, which you will receive from your grant manager, will be completed by you and your grant manager after the grant agreement is executed and should be updated as needed throughout the grant term. Next slide, please. Please keep in mind that the individual who signs the grant agreement on behalf of the organization will also need to sign the invoices unless delegated to another individual. If you need to delegate this signature authority, then please indicate this in the authorized signatory form of the grant agreement. Now I'll hand it over to Sarah, who will go over the transaction process.
Thank you, Kane. Once you're into your grant agreement, your grant manager will work with you to finalize all the required project documents associated with the acquisition transaction from for the easement and fee covenant negotiations to closing. Much of the transaction process is the same as for the easements and fee acquisitions, except there are going to be some differences, and we will make a note on where those differences are. So on this slide is the acquisition timing that we will expect. So while you are working on various aspects of your project at any given time, there will be some general ideas and specific tasks that will for the acquisition the process to occur, and more specifically when you should involve the department in those tasks. Most importantly, please keep in mind that working with DOC is an iterative process. We'll likely return any documents we receive back to you with some feedback. For example, we typically may see up to 5 versions of your easement language before they're approved with the final document. And more if there are significant changes in reserved rights or if multiple match funders are involved. While we'll work to return these documents to you in a timely fashion, items that may require additional review may take longer than the time showed on this slide. If you have any questions about document status, do not hesitate to talk to your grant manager. In addition, we generally expect to receive a grantee and landowner reviewed versions of the easement before we receive any other documents. If you attempt to submit an appraisal or baseline report for the DOC to review before we receive the grantee and landowner reviewed versions of the easement, we will postpone reviewing those documents until we have received that draft easement. If you have timing constraints on the transaction and that necessitates review of those documents out of order, we request that you discuss that with your grant manager. So for easements and fee covenant negotiations, the negotiations of the easement deed versus the fee covenants is where our easement and fee acquisitions differ the most. I'll begin by discussing what our easement negotiations will look like and then go over to our fee covenant negotiations. For those with fee titles process, this process may vary, and your grant manager will work with you. The department has approval authority of the final easement for easement transactions and the final conservation covenants for fee transactions resulting from each SALC grant. It is recommended to include the department in your negotiations early in the process. For fee acquisition covenant please reference a hypothetical easement as part of their terms. So this easement information may be pertinent to fee acquisition grantees as well. An easement template and checklist of the required easement term is available for you to use, as the SALC Round 5 template is the latest version. Use of the easement template is in its entirety will expedite the department's review of your easement. If you choose to use a different easement as a base, please refer to the checklist for a list of items required for inclusion by SALC, including those clauses and statements that should be integrated verbatim. Both the easement template and the checklist are available on DOC's website. We'll likely be updating our template this spring, and once those updates are completed, your grant manager will work with you to incorporate those updates as applicable to your project. If you have any questions or concerns about particular updates, your grant manager will be available to answer those questions. Most of the easements and fee projects will include a number of rights reserved by the landowner. The reserved rights include in the easement or fee covenant documents and assessed by the appraiser should be consistent with those outlined in the project application. Any changes in those reserved rights should, where possible, be requested prior to the completion of the appraisal to avoid any of the need for any appraisal update. As always, all reserved rights are subject to review and approval by the department. Any changes that would substantially alter the project or that could affect the project's eligibility of or competitiveness will be denied. Any other changes will be reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And then failure to integrate the SALC's required easements terms or to consult with the department on reserved rights early on the easement negotiations process may result in a delay to your project. So for fee covenant negotiations and grant agreement amendments, while easement grantees will negotiate the easement deed and approval of exhibits to the easement with their grant manager, fee acquisition grantees will negotiate a hypothetical agricultural conservation easement for appraisal purposes and for incorporating into the grant agreement at a later date. In addition, fee acquisition grantees will work with DOC to customize additional documents to incorporate any reserved rights specific to the project. These documents include Exhibits G and H in the grant agreement, the Notice of Unrecorded Grant Agreement, and Offer to Convey. Once customized, the grant agreement will be amended to incorporate Exhibits G and H, as well as Exhibit I, the irrevocable offer to convey, and Exhibit J, easement template, which into the document. So for document formatting, in order to ensure that all parties are working on the most recent version of the document, we ask that you rename your easement document in a logical way prior to each resubmission for the Department of Conservation for review. We understand that most grantees receive feedback from multiple parties, so how you name the document is up to you. If the document is not renamed or the length of the document name becomes too long, DOC staff may rename the document for ease of tracking within our internal system. Within the file itself, please include the version number and date of the last revision in the footer. All changes between versions should be provided in redline track changes. This is including revisions proposed by other funders. Ideally, please include who is requesting the change, like whether it is the grantee, the landowner, or match funder. Substantial formatting issues can cause significant delays in the DOC's review of your easement. For this reason, we will return the document with substantial formatting issues to you for correction without reviewing the document first. For exhibits, on the screen here is an example of what we would like to see as for maps. Map exhibits included in your easement or as attached to your fee covenants should be readable in black and white and avoid grayscale. They should have very simple features that can easily be scanned and recorded. You can use various line weights and symbology to show contrast between different features. For example, solid versus dashed lines or polygons with gray fill or cross-hatching. Shaded polygons can be used to call attention to natural features on the landscape or public lands or adjacent easements or other areas. All maps should include the easement boundary and key features such as APNs, creeks, roads, water infrastructure, and jurisdictional boundaries. If feasible for the scale of the map, infrastructure features such as fences, wells, pumps, towers, solar arrays, and other features should be identified with a symbol or text label. All map exhibits should include a north arrow and a scale bar, as well as a basic legend with a data source notes. The location of both existing buildings and future building envelopes should be shown on the building envelope and existing improvements map, along with acreage for the related envelopes on either the map or the legend. If the building envelope locations are not surveyed, the department highly recommends using GPS coordinates to show where the boundaries of the building envelopes are located. If you have any questions or need assistance, your grant manager is available to provide technical assistance on this. Color graphics, complex patterns, grayscale, and aerial photos are best saved for those that are in the baseline documentation report. So for the appraisal, per SALC guidelines, the amount of the SALC contributes to the acquisition price is based off of the appraisal value of the interest to purchase the based on the qualified appraisal. For easements, this is based on the appraisal easement value. For fee acquisitions, where SALC is only paying for a portion of the purchase, this is based on the appraisal value of a hypothetical easement. For fee acquisitions, such where SALC is paying 100% of the purchase, this is the fair market value of the property. In all cases, the appraisal must be approved by DGS and DOC, must meet DGS's appraisal specifications and comply with the DOC's overview and preparation of the appraisal. They must use the before and after method, and they must list the Department of Conservation and DGS as intended users. For easements and fee acquisition, where SALC is covering a portion of the purchase price, the appraisal must also include the reserved rights consistent with those in the approved easement, as well as a copy of the draft easement, particularly the required SALC terms. We may require an update to those appraisals if the effective date is over 2 years prior to the close of escrow, or the easement term is reserved rights assessed in the appraisal differ substantially from those listed in the final approved easement. Keep in mind, we will only pay for an appraisal use as the basis of the easement value, and we will not pay for any appraisal updates. You can find a copy of our overview and preparation of appraisal guidelines document on our Managing Your Grant webpage. For title, DOC's title review begins in the pre-proposal stage and continues throughout the duration of the project. Your grant manager will work with you to determine which title exceptions will need to be removed prior to the close of escrow. If the preliminary title report that you've submitted with your application is over 1 year old, or if you have resolved specific title concerns between the application and now, we request that you please submit an updated report at your earliest convenience so that we can reassess whether any concerns remain or any additional concerns have surfaced. Please keep in mind that when we request a preliminary title report, we also are requesting all underlying documents associated with that report. These documents are most easily submitted if they are hyperlinked within the preliminary title report itself. If the preliminary title report is not hyperlinked, you will need to email us copies of the underlying documents. Delays in submitting the underlying documents for projects may result in delays in our review. For the baseline report, we are required for which are required for both easements and fee acquisition projects, and it serves as a foundation for annual monitoring visits. The baseline report will be reviewed and approved by the SALC grant manager. The SALC program has prepared a baseline document report checklist as a resource for grantees. The checklist is available on our webpage or upon request and is intended to encourage the preparation of a thorough baseline report and by outlining SALC's minimum expectations. Of particular importance is our expectation for the photo location, so please take a close look at those to avoid having to return to the property to take additional photos. If a significant amount of the time transfers between the photo dates and the actual closing, then we may require grantees to return to the property to confirm the photos are still valid. Lastly, while we're preparing a baseline report, please word search the draft agricultural conservation easement for any references to the baseline report and include applicable references and information in that baseline report. For those that were awarded funding for a conservation management or carbon farm plan, you will need to work with your grant manager to ensure that these are reviewed, approved, and included in the easement. Appendix J of the guidelines outlines the general requirements for, as well as specifics about what is required to be included in these plans. For easement projects, management plans and carbon farms plans must be approved by the department and signed by the grantee and landowner prior to the execution of the deed and release of funds allocated for the plan. For fee acquisition projects, management plans and carbon farm plans must be completed and approved within 1 year of close of escrow on the sale and be completed within the grant term. The plan must be developed by a qualified planner or resource conservation district. Grantees may also use in-house resources to develop the plan if they meet the requirements for being a qualified planner. If you would like to use in-house resources to develop your plan, please contact your grant manager to discuss before incurring costs. These are considered living documents and that must be reviewed by the landowner and easement holder at least every 10 years. The plan must be updated if changes to the ag operation or ownership of the property occur that have potential to significantly impact the conservation value or purpose of the acquisition. The plans are intended to provide flexibility for management of the land within the purposes of the acquisition. The easement holder grantee must notify SALC of any changes to the management that have the potential to significantly impact the conservation values, purpose of the acquisition, such as the significant changes to the agricultural operation, ownership of the property. Lastly, note these plans must be addressed in your annual monitoring reports. Specifically, the easement holder must report to the landowner's implementation of the plan and any changes into the ag operation or ownership that have potential impact on those conservation values or purposes from the previous year. Please keep in mind that this is when planning for the stewardship of your easement. For easement projects that cover existing forest lands that are over 40 acres, the project must include a management plan which the landowner agrees to maintain and improve forest health as included in Public Resources Code 4751 per CAL FIRE. These definitions include oak woodlands, but they may also be additional nuances we can consider. For all projects where this code might be relevant, we will have included a condition in your award letter to that effect. We will work with each grantee to further review the property's characteristics and determine whether this code section applies. If it does apply and you are already planning on developing a management plan as part of your project, incorporation of the requirements in the statute into your management plan is an acceptable way to meet this requirement. If you are not planning on developing a management plan as part of your grant, you will need to develop a management plan or update an existing management plan for the property to address this requirement. Please reach out to your grant manager to discuss any questions you may have. This code does not apply for the fee acquisition projects. For escrow instructions, once the appraisal and baseline report and easement or fee covenants are near their final draft and all of the title issues have been resolved, meaning there is a clear plan to address and remove all issues from the title policy report, it will be time to begin drafting those escrow instructions. In most cases, the grantee will provide the department with a draft buyer seller escrow instructions, and the department will be added for combined escrow joint escrow instructions. The department must review and approve these draft escrow instructions and to ensure that there's required content, which includes the subordination of liens and financial encumbrances, recordation of the easement immediately following the close of escrow. For fee title acquisitions, we'll be requiring concurrent recordation of the grant deed, notice of unrecorded grant agreements, and irrevocable offer to convey. Insurance of title, issuance of title insurance with SGC listed as an additionally insured, provisions of all relevant documentations to DOC within 30 days of closing, provisions that state should the easement or fee not be conveyed, SALC funds will be returned to the department. Please refer to attachment 4, conditions of funding dispersal, to the grant agreement for a complete list of required content and for an outline of conditions that must be met before DOC is able to distribute acquisition funding into escrow. Before the department can release the warrant into escrow, the department must provide with the escrow officer's signature on the escrow instructions. We do have a template for joint escrow instructions that can be included in your department's requirements included. And this is also, it's on our website, as well as you can contact your grant manager. The grantees may begin invoicing no earlier than 60 days from after the grant agreement has been executed between the department and the grantee. Work completed before or after the grant term is not eligible for reimbursement. All invoices must be signed by the authorized signatory or designee listed within the grant agreement. Please submit a draft that is unsigned invoices before submitting a signed invoice for processing to ensure that proper turnaround time. Failure to do so may result in payment delays or rejections of invoices. The grant agreement states that the maximum associated amount of associated costs available to the grantee. So please be ensured that the draft grant agreement reflects the correct amount. The department may withhold a final payment until all terms of the grant agreement have been satisfied. It is also important to note that all invoices must be submitted with supporting documentations, including purchase orders, cancellation checks, or canceled checks, detailed timesheets, and there's please see the list of reimbursed costs in the guidelines. Funds cannot be shifted between the acquisition cost category and the associated cost category of the budget, nor can they be shifted between the management or carbon farm plan line item and other associated costs. Budget modifications are discussed in Exhibit B to the agreement. The department will also will only reimburse the grantee for actual expenses incurred during the time of this grant agreement as specified in the budget detail worksheet. So continuing on with the acquisition invoicing, once the grant manager has determined the project is near completion, the grant manager will request that the grantee provide a draft acquisition invoice using the template provided to the grant agreement. The grant manager will review the invoice for accuracy and, if approved, will request that the grantee have the invoice signed and formally submitted for payment. The invoice must be signed by the authorized signatory or authorized designee as stated in the grant agreement. And now I'll hand it back over to Kane to discuss the tasks and requirements that must be completed once the easement has been recorded.
So thanks so much, Sarah. Just a couple quick notes on title issues before we move on. A couple other things I wanted to share with you all. The department reserves the right to withhold acquisition funding until all title issues are addressed to the department's satisfaction. And the title concerns we typically flag include but are not limited to separated mineral rights, lack of legal access, other third-party interests, deeds of trust, and leases. Title concerns can be addressed through subordination of leases and deeds of trust, and all subordination documents are subject to DOC review and must be approved by DOC prior to the close of escrow. Deeds of trust can also be paid off in full in escrow or before escrow. If your landowner decides to pay off their deed of trust in escrow, you will need to include the reconveyance within your escrow instructions. Also, DOC will need to review and approve a pro forma title insurance policy for the easement prior to the close of escrow. The pro forma must only include those title exceptions accepted by DOC, and it should list the Strategic Growth Council as additional insured, and provide insurance for the full appraised value of the easement. The approved version of the pro forma will be referenced in the escrow instructions, so please have the title company date each version for easy reference. Now for those post-closing tasks. Once the easement has been signed and recorded, the following items must be submitted to the department within 30 days. A conformed copy of the recorded easement or covenant documents, conformed copy of any subordination agreements, a copy of the title insurance policy, a signed copy of the baseline conditions report, final escrow, closing, and settlement statement, and a final report. Please note that the final associated cost invoice will only be accepted for payment once all deliverables listed on this slide have been received and approved by the department. Your final report can be found in your grant agreement. Next slide, please. If the grantee chooses to publicize the acquisition project when awarded or after it has closed, grantees must coordinate the press release with the department. All press releases must be approved by DOC prior to distribution, and DOC and SGC must be alerted about and invited to participate in any and all press conferences related to the grant. Grantees are required to use Strategic Growth Council, California Climate Investments, and Department of Conservation names and/or logos for all publications, websites, signage, invitations, and other media-related and public outreach projects related to the grant. SALC staff will provide SGC, CCI, and DOC logo files and guidance on their usage directly to grant recipients. The department will review the draft press release and ensure that the grantee has included the following: the roles the department, CCI, and Strategic Growth Council have played in the capacity program, specific language as noted in the grant agreement and SALC guidelines, California Climate Investments listed as the funding source and California Climate Investments logo in the publication, the CCI email address on the press release distribution lists, as well as the @CA Climate Investments Twitter link on web pages that are related to the project. Please note that the California Climate Investments logo must comply with the usage guidelines. The usage guidelines can be found on the California Climate Investments webpage. please let your grant manager know if you intend to publicize your project so that they can coordinate with the appropriate people early in the process. We are also happy to include SGC and DOC director quotes in your draft press release. Once the easement is closed, annual monitoring of the easement property by the easement holder is required to ensure compliance with the terms of the easement. The annual monitoring report should describe the following items: the method of monitoring, the current condition of the property, any violations or potential violations, as well as any corrective action taken and the resolution of any violations, any requested or approved actions taken in accordance with the noticing and approval requirements in the easement terms, and any transfer of interest, including leases or subsequent easements within the last 12 months. Monitoring reports should be submitted to the program email. Monitoring reports are available online and should be submitted by June 30th of each year. Ideally, all monitoring reports should be submitted as soon as they are completed and signed. And that program email is salcp@conservation.ca.gov. And that concludes our presentation. I know that was a lot of information, so hopefully you're all taking good notes. And if not, we'll make this recording available to y'all afterwards. So if you have any questions, please send it to us via the chat function and we'll respond directly in the chat. Or if you have a question and you'd like to raise your hand, you can also do that. Yeah, Brendan.
Hey, thanks for the presentation, guys. We have a property that has both a timber management plan, NTMP on it, and it's also a grazing property. With regards to the management plan, should that management plan encompass management of both of those harvest activities, agricultural activities, or could we use the NTMP as our management plan for the timber harvest and then develop a separate grazing plan? Or how would you address this?
Yeah, I think either approach would be acceptable. I believe you're referring to the Strata Ranch project, so you could actually reach out directly to me, Brennan, and we can discuss the particulars, but either one of those would probably work.
Super. Another quick question. Title policy insurance. We need to additionally insure SGC and DOC?
No, just the Strategic Growth Council.
Okay, thanks.
Anyone else? We're happy to answer any of your questions about acquisitions or the program in general. You can ask us what our favorite color is. All right. Well, thanks everyone. As always, looks like we do have one question from Janet Voris.
I'll just jump in here. So from Michael Blackman, when can we expect to hear from our grant manager? If you haven't heard from your grant manager yet, then expect to hear from them within the next week or two.
Thanks, Artemis. I apologize. Michael, I didn't see your question in there. Well, the SALC staff will be hanging out here for a few more minutes if anyone thinks of a question. Otherwise, as always, please feel free to reach out to your grant managers directly. We're always happy to take your questions and discuss your projects in more detail. Janet asks, will the forms and exhibits in the grant agreement also be available in Word format? Yes. Yeah, please reach out to your grant manager and they can send you those forms. Skylar asks, when I download the SALC docs from the DOC website, it always asks for a login. Is there a trick to this? Or when I open the Word docs? Melinda or Artemis, do you have an answer to that?
There shouldn't be a requirement for a password, and I think there may be one or two documents still remaining that might require that. But Skylar, is that for every document you try to download off the website? Because that should not be.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, feel free to come up with you. Yeah, if you have any troubles, you can always just email salc@conservation.ca.gov and they would try to look into it. But I think there may be maybe one or two documents still remaining on the website that it's a request for file and you just put in your email and pretty much immediately you have access to it. But the rest of them should download directly, so if that's not, so.
Skylar, which documents are you trying to access? Just so I know.
Sure. Basically what happens is whenever I download any of the Word format documents on like the managing your grant page, it allows me to download them, but it'll repeatedly prompt for some sort of login. And I could get through it. You just have to kind of cancel that prompt a few times. It may only be happening on my computer. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and
I figured
I haven't
ask.
heard that happen when you haven't. So, but I would be curious if anyone else has that problem, please email us. They should be able to open directly. So maybe there's some sort of, you can see that it's wanting to be cautious about it for you guys. So. And none of the Word documents should be part of that. Right. Yeah. And thank you everybody for joining us today. Really appreciate your time and as Kane's mentioned, just know that your grant manager's around to help you if you have any questions at all. So with that, I'll stop the recording, but like I said, we'll be around if you have more questions. You can stay involved in the meeting.